Richard Wolff, the man who breaks down capitalism in ways that make sense to working folk like you and me, and Dr. Cornel West will be there, the brilliant philosopher and activist who never stops fighting for justice and speaking truth to power and to the powerless for that matter. So this isn't just another conference. This is where ideas get tested, where the conversations that shape our future begin. Multiple plenary sessions, dynamic speakers, real talk about the issues that impact our communities. And then some good food and a live band. Saturday, October 25th, LA Trade Tech, Left Coast Forum. The event is free and open to the public, but you must register at our KBLA1580.com website, where you can also peep the plenary topics. The future belongs to those who show up and engage. So don't just think about change, be part of the conversation that creates it. The Left Coast Forum is brought to you by the LA Progressive, the Empowerment Congress, Community Coalition, Partnership for Growth LA, Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, LA Care Health Plan, United Teachers Los Angeles, Black Progressive Action Coalition, St. John's Community Health, the National Lawyers Guild, the Weingart Foundation, and more. Space is limited, so if I were you, I'd register right now at KBLA1580.com. Your voice matters, your presence matters. We'll see you there.
A helping hand to your fellow man.
Aye. What? Look. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. Huh? They ain't talking about nothing. Aye. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. What they talking about? They ain't talking about nothing. Huh? They ain't talking about nothing. Pickable, I just put them bookers in my chain. Pickable, 80 pointers like a Kobe game. Pickable, 7.62s, I make them plain. Pickable, popping out, you better not smell my name.
This is The Black Pact, and I'm your host, Adrianne Shropshire, and thank you for that, Andy. I think we need to start every 5 p.m. hour off with a little bit of Kendrick. Lift the spirits after talking about all the madness and drama happening in our country right now. And unfortunately, I can't move on from the madness and drama. We talked earlier in the show about how we're about 3 weeks out from Election Day, not just here in California, where we'll be voting for Proposition 50, but also across the country. But there is a story that has gone a little bit under the radar, and I know that there has not been a lot of conversation about it, and that is that the DOJ filed suit against several states, including Michigan, Pennsylvania, and even our own state, demanding certain voter information from the states, access to voter data in these states. So I wanted to sort of lift this story up, and joining us now to discuss what is happening around this and why it matters is Nick Presley, the co-director of states at All Voting is Local. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So can you give us just a little bit of context, right, about why the DOJ is suing for voter registration rules and what is going on with this?
Yeah, so over the summer, the U.S. Justice Department began talks with Homeland Security to share voter roll data in order to aid in criminal and immigration probes. So the DOJ's Civil Rights Division ended up requesting voter registration info from 38 states. Since then, as you noted, the DOJ has sued 8 states, California, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania, for non-compliance. Mm-hmm. We see this as kind of just a continuation of moment of ongoing threats, a clear advancement of anti-voter attacks on elected officials, our election systems, and even civil society. Basically, the Department of Justice is using the power of the federal government to interfere with how states run elections. Mm-hmm. They're sending letters to state election officials, harassing them for sensitive data that it actually has no right to, all under the guise of implementing President Donald Trump's election executive order, which calls for a sweeping overhaul of federal elections.
And let me go back for a second and just ask you, because there's this sort of pretext also around, like, I guess fraud, and I don't totally understand. I guess part of the fraud is connected to this idea that their sort of ongoing attack on immigrants, right? Which feels like it's very much connected to everything that they do, or at least the pretext for a lot of what they're doing in the country right now. But is that essentially it? It really is about sort of his belief, or at least attempt to assert, that there's all this fraud happening, and so therefore they need to dig into everything that's happening within the state election system?
That's what they're saying on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, it's I think, manufactured concern. It's the purpose of this abuse of power is to further these election lies, which end up undermining trust in the voting process and putting Americans' privacies at risk. Mm-hmm. When people in institutions in power spread lies about elections, it hurts voters' trust in the system. Yeah. And when voters don't trust the system, they don't turn out to vote. Right. And we know what happens when voters don't vote. Then we end up getting minority rule with people who may not have, everyone's best interest at heart.
Who, in fact, do not. In fact, very, very plainly and very directly do not. Well, I want to dig into this a little bit more when we come forward, because I do think that this is a story that has not been out there that much. There aren't a lot of people talking about it. I don't think that voters in even the 8 states that the Department of Justice has sued know or are aware, right, that the federal government is trying to get access, right, to their data, and it feels a little bit, like it starts to bleed into this, this notion that we're all, living within a surveillance state all the time. But I want to dig into it a little bit more on the other side. We're going to continue this conversation with Nick Presley, the co-director of states at All Voting is Local. Stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580. You're listening to the Black Pack.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
$5,000. That's the average amount of money people in the U.S. are now spending on gas in a year. $5,000. That's crazy. If you drive, you have to download Upside, the free app that gives you cash back every time you get gas. That's right. You can earn real cash back with Upside just by buying the gas you're already buying. You can literally start earning cash back today.
I use Upside every time I fill up, and I've already made around $300.
You're putting gas in your car anyway. Why not get real cash back? If you like free money, download Upside.
I'm saving the cash I earn from using Upside to help pay for a vacation later this year.
Download the free Upside app now to earn cash back every time you buy gas. Use promo code MAJOR25 to get an extra 25 cents per gallon on your first tank. You can cash out anytime right to your bank, PayPal, or a gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Upside app and use promo code MAJOR25 for a 25 cents per gallon bonus on your first tank. That's code MAJOR25 for a 25 cents per gallon bonus.
Stop settling for weak sound. It's time to level up your game and bring the boom. Hit the town with the ultra-durable LG X Boom portable speaker and enjoy vibrant sound wherever you go. Elevate your listening experience to new heights, because let's be real, your music deserves it. The future of sound is now with LG X Boom. And for a limited time, save 25% at LG.com with code FALL25. Bring the boom. X Boom.
Do you have $10,000 or more in credit card debt? Are you barely getting by making minimum payments? With credit card debt reaching all-time highs, National Debt Relief is letting everyone know about great debt relief options now available to help people with overwhelming credit card debt. These options may reduce a large portion of your credit card debt. Get a free debt relief consultation when you call 800-259-9922. 800-259-9922. That's 800-259-9922.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you, when we fight, we win. The Youth Justice Coalition is challenging America's addiction to incarceration and discrimination. YJC works to dismantle policies leading to mass incarceration, law enforcement violence, and the school-to-prison pipeline. Their approach? Transformative justice, community intervention, free LA high school, legal defense, and system monitoring. YJC promotes safety without relying on prisons. Their goal? Prevent system contact and help people exit the system through direct action, advocacy, and education. Want to get involved or need help? Call 323-235-4243. That's 323-235-4243. Join YJC in creating change. When we fight, we win. KBLA Talk 1580, your voice for justice. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We are talking with Nick Presley, the co-director of states at All Voting is Local, about the Department of Justice suing several states over voter registration while getting access to voter registration rolls. And I think, Nick, the DOJ claims that this is a part of their authority under the National Voter Registration Act, I think. And so I wonder, and help me understand, like, what are the states' sort of what latitude do they have, right, to have to comply or not comply with the Department of Justice saying we need access to sensitive data. You mentioned that earlier. Access to sensitive data. What what can states do, right? To not have to be in this kind of relationship with the federal government trying to gain access to state voter rolls.
Well, it's really quite simple. The states run the election.
Mm-hmm.
The president does.
Right.
The administration does not have the legal authority to control elections. It doesn't have the legal authority to change the voting process. And this is constitutionally granted. The Constitution grants states the authority to manage their own elections. And this is because state election officials, they're the ones with the localized knowledge. They're the ones with the experience necessary to maintain accurate voter rolls. They're already required by federal and state law to keep voter registration lists up to date and accurate. And if, the federal government wants to impact voting policy, they need to do that through passing laws through Congress. This kind of interference, it just makes elections less safe while compromising voters' data. These kinds of threats to data security and privacy, all voters should be paying attention to this, because if that data is combined with flawed tools like, a retooled save system or outdated data models, like the change of address database, then we're going to see disenfranchisement of eligible voters. And this is, a roadmap that they're creating of a permission structure is what we call it. Okay. Mm-hmm. To be very clear, the 2026 election isn't in the distant future. We are seeing it already underway, and these actions are setting the stage for 26. They're setting the stage for 28. This isn't just about executive overreach. We're seeing this be about stripping communities of their voice and power. And they've told us this. They told us how they plan to change elections so that the administration and its allies from Washington to the state legislatures can hold on to power. We've got Project 2025. We've seen the election order, or the executive order on voting. We've seen statements from the president and his prominent election denier allies. These are a clear set of priorities and threats that establish a permission structure for state officials to follow in order to take power from the people.
And it's essentially, we talked a lot, certainly in the last election, we talked a lot about the sort of voter roll purges, right? And I wonder if this is what you're meaning by permission structure. And if I'm getting this wrong, then please do correct me. But we talked a lot about voter purges and the sort of going in and just removing whole persons, right, off the voter roll. Last election cycle, we were constantly telling people, go back and check your registration, make sure you didn't get kicked off if you did re-register, doing all the sorts of things. But is there a relationship between this and that, right? Is that what you're saying? Is the permission structure that will give or cause the lots and lots of people to be removed from the voter rolls, whether it's because they're using whatever databases that are compromised, et cetera?
Yeah, that's very much a part of it. And it goes further than that even. We've seen it show up in state-level efforts to relitigate the 2020 election in Fulton County based off of the actions of the state election board out there. We've seen it in changing how people are able to vote to less efficient structures. We've seen it for removing states from the ERIC Compact, which ensured that there was a sharing of information between states so that voters were not able to vote twice in multiple locations. And really what this is about is that we all know voting is one of the top ways that people feel empowered, but President Trump and the DOJ are trying to take that away by laying the groundwork for election interference in our states and pushing more lies. They just laid off a number of workers from CISA, which is the security and election infrastructure. And we see that these administration and agencies like the DOJ are looking to sow doubts in the election process and use mass voter silencing to take away the votes of Americans who don't look like them or live like them.
So we have Michigan and Pennsylvania, which are two of the states where all voting is local organizes. Can you talk? There are two of the states that have been sued by DOJ. Can you talk a little bit about what this will mean for voters? What will this mean for voters, kind of practically? But what does this mean for voters in those two states and others that are in the same position?
Well, it really comes down to the state election officials, and in Pennsylvania and Michigan thus far, we've seen that they're not playing ball. They've recognized that these recent orders are unlawful, and that voters' personal information of the sort that's being sought should remain private. And so, right now, we are going to take this to the court. We need to see more election officials resisting these unlawful federal interference in our voting rolls. And our current work is ensuring that the people in this country have the access they need and deserve and told us they want. We are seeing election officials across the country really start to pay attention to what some of the tenets that all voting is local released in our pro-voter agenda this past June. That is a long-term affirmative vision for voting. It calls on state and local election officials to use the broad authority they've already have to expand access to the ballot instead of restricting it. And so as long as, there is a challenge from the state level and in partnership with organizations like ours, I think that we will see some victories here.
And this is the challenge, right? I mean, what you just said, which is if you have state governments that are willing to challenge, then there's a chance to fight back, and you have that in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. I do want to, because I think I meant to ask this earlier, and you've mentioned it a couple of times about the sort of sensitive data information that they're trying to get. What kinds of information is being sought by the federal government through these voter files?
They are seeking information related to Social Security numbers. They're seeking address information. They're seeking last known votes. Some of this information is public information already, but the information we're pushing back on is the personally identifiable information that would help them ID who's voting for whom and how in whatever manner they do. It depends on the state how that information is used, which is one of the benefits of our system, and. So I mean, I think that's the thing that I said earlier about like feeling like we're constantly part of the surveillance state in all kinds of ways in our life. The other day I was looking out my my living room window and I was like, why is that Waymo just sitting across the street like taking pictures of every house in the neighborhood? Anyway, sometimes we may get a little paranoid, but it does feel like there is this this constant surveillance. And the thing that you're saying though that strikes me is voter information that people believe. So some voter information is public. It's how Black Pac reaches out to voters across the country, right? But like there's some information that people believe is actually confidential, and obviously no one thinks that their Social Security number should be given up for any reason. But this idea that you cast your vote, and it isn't just supposed to, you can choose to tell people who you voted for or not, right? It isn't just that isn't just out there, right? That you voted, right, is public information, but not necessarily who you voted for. And that's this sort of like the federal government gaining access to voter data
that would tell them, that it can identify an individual person and their voting patterns. That seems, when we talk about, you said it's not just overstepping, but that certainly feels like a lot of overstepping on the part of our federal government.
Absolutely. I mean, the information that's already public for the vote for various states' voter rolls is all that needs to be public. In many cases, they're looking for Social Security numbers, dates of birth, driver's license numbers, information that they can use to then really narrow in and target and decide who gets to stay on the voters' rolls and who doesn't. And this is all in an effort that, kind of pattern after what we saw them say that they want to do with Project 2025 and pattern after previous attacks. It's kind of the same old playbook we've seen before, only with broader implementation from the federal government all the way down to some state and some county levels.
Yeah. This is all. Part of the reason why I want to have this conversation is I really do think that there are not a lot of voters, and it's important for our listeners to know that this is happening. That California is one of those states, but it also feels like it is a part of this broader battle, right, around voting rights. Or you tell me sort of your perspective on it. This sort of ongoing, effort to eradicate, what's left, right, of the Voting Rights Act in this country, and we'll see the Supreme Court will be making some decisions this term. But from your perspective, is it all kind of connected? All of these things are about, and you said this a little bit earlier, all about sort of eroding people's right to vote in this country. Oh,
absolutely. They plan on making it so we don't have free and fair elections ever again. We know that voting is a key pathway out of this moment for Americans. The White House administration knows that too. And again, they told us how they plan to change this. Project 2025, you hear mentioned a number of times. But we consider these a pattern of top threats. You're right. This is a larger, nationwide strategy that consists of attacks on voter eligibility and registration through the SAVE Act list maintenance. We've seen them have attacks on voters themselves with rollbacks to vote by mail and a declaration that of efforts to do just that. We've seen them attack election systems and administrations through the voting machines and efforts to force people to provide identification that they cannot always provide through DPO suite, documentary proof of citizenship. And then we've seen election deniers in positions of power continuing to use that power. As I mentioned before, Georgia is a really good example of that, with the action of the state election board we've seen over the past few years. And so this is a long-term strategy that has been implemented, that began to be implemented a while ago. And again, has set its sights on the elections in 2026 and 2028 and smaller elections in between in an effort to eventually get us to a place where we do not have free and fair elections anymore.
And so when you all are doing your work organizing around these issues, and particularly right now with the lawsuits in the states where you all are active, how are you all talking to just residents? How are you all talking to voters about what they can and should be doing in this moment? How can they be advocating on their own behalf to make sure that their states are fighting for them, and that their congressional representatives understand how they feel? How are you all organizing people to be advocates for themselves, but also to be active around this issue?
Well, it's definitely by contacting your local election officials, your county level election officials, your state election officials, and we work very much in coalition with a number of great organizations to do this as well. And we've coordinated with these partners to reach out to voters and to launch a field-wide strategy. We're also talking to state and local election officials. And so we, encourage voters to join us in that as we talk to these election officials about the top actions that they should prioritize heading into 26 and 28 to ensure our elections remain free and fair.
Can I ask you to just talk about what some of those are? The other things that the local election officials should be prioritizing?
Yes, you read my mind. So we again, it looks different depending on the state or the locality in many cases because of the state level control over the way elections are run. But we just re-released our pro voter agenda I mentioned briefly earlier this past June. And this agenda outlines these actionable solutions that will help ensure that these state and election officials do everything they can to ensure that Americans get on the voter rolls and stay on the voter rolls. We work with them on specific areas in which they can help Americans vote when, where, and how it works for them in under 30 minutes, by the way.
Right, yeah, thank you.
Hours-long lines, you see at some of these places. In Pennsylvania, we saw them in schools a lot.
Yeah.
And also working with election officials to ensure that partisan interference in vote counting and certification of the votes is stopped. We also highlight anti-voter laws when they are attempted to be passed or through legislation, and we support election officials and push back on them when necessary to urge them to advocate for policies, again, that make it easier, not harder, for every voter to participate in our democracy.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you to just talk about that a little bit, because it can be overwhelming to constantly be, hearing about the ways in which they're, the federal government right now and others, right, and state governments as well across the country are trying to undermine our right to vote. But I think it's important that people understand that there are things that we can be doing, right, to sort of shore up voter access, right, to shore up the right to vote in our states, and that doesn't have to be information that's exclusively held, right, by experts or local election leaders. Like, that is something that the things that can be done are things that we all should be aware of, so that we can be advocating around those things. I have so many questions that I have for you that I realize that I'm running out of time to ask you them when we come forward. I do, though, want to have you talk a little bit about the organization and a little bit more about the organization and what you all are doing, and the ways in which you all are pushing back in what is a really frightening moment as we head into next year's midterm election, before we even get to this year's election, which is challenging. So when we come forward, we're going to continue this conversation with Nick Presley, co-director of States at All Voting is Local. Stay with us.
More of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580 when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton with BIN News Now. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is urging New Yorkers to prepare for an incoming nor'easter, monitor forecasts, and use caution when traveling. Black New York City Mayor Eric Adams is warning residents to avoid boats, beaches, and basement apartments.
We're really asking people to be careful.
The National Weather Service has issued high wind and coastal flooding watches. Black Orleans Parish escapee Derek Groves is heading back to Louisiana after being captured in Atlanta. Georgia jail records show he's no longer in custody there. His arrest came after a Crime Stoppers tip was shared with U.S. Marshals, though officials haven't said when or where the call came in. And Maryland State Police Superintendent Colonel Roland Butler will step down next month. Black Governor Wes Moore named State Senator and former Prince George's County Sheriff Michael Jackson as acting superintendent. Butler, the agency's first black leader, was appointed in 2023. Get BIN News Now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Slowing on the 405, we're going to start out of Irvine, northbound from Irvine Center Drive. Delays in stretches all the way to the 710 freeway. And more slowing ahead out of Culver City from the 90 as you continue in stretches towards the 5 merge into Sylmar. Tough on the 101 southbound getting out of Calabasas. Delays from Las Virgenes. You're on the brakes and stretches all the way into downtown Los Angeles. Tough in Torrey, West 210, leaving the 605 all the way to the 134.
Do you really know what's in your tap water? We believe your water should support your health, not work against it. Upgrade your home with a LifeSource Whole House system. Clean water from every tap, no salt, no hassle. Call 1-800-WATER-99 or visit lifesourcewater.com.
Warranty limitations apply.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
It's obvious Father Time is having more conversations with LeBron this year. At age 40, LeBron is dealing with health issues that never came up during his 22 years in the NBA. At the start of training camp, the Lakers medical staff advised LeBron not to practice or play in the preseason. LeBron was diagnosed with irritation in his glutes, the muscles in the rear end. Now LeBron has inflammation in the sciatica nerve, a nerve that stretches from the lower back to the legs and feet. The inflammation will keep LeBron sidelined for at least 3 to 4 weeks. He will miss the Lakers' regular season opener against Golden State on October 21st. LeBron will be 41 in December. He's been one of the NBA's more durable players throughout his career, but Father Time is in LeBron's ear. It's taking LeBron a little bit longer to recover from certain ailments. Lakers Nation needs to get prepared. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Hello, KBLA delegation. Tavis Smiley here. On Saturday, October 25th, LA Trade Tech becomes the epicenter of ideas that matter. The Left Coast Forum is bringing together voices that challenge, inspire, and illuminate, with keynote presentations from people like noted economist Richard Wolff, the man who breaks down capitalism in ways that make sense to working folk like you and me, and Dr. Cornel West will be there, the brilliant philosopher and activist who never stops fighting for justice and speaking truth to power and to the powerless, for that matter. So this isn't just another conference. This is where ideas get tested, where the conversations that shape our future begin. Multiple plenary sessions, dynamic speakers, real talk about the issues that impact our communities, and then some good food and a live band. Saturday, October 25th, LA Trade Tech, Left Coast Forum. The event is free and open to the public, but you must register at our KBLA1580.com website, where you can also peep the plenary topics. The future belongs to those who show up and engage. So don't just think about change, be part of the conversation that creates it. The Left Coast Forum is brought to you by the LA Progressive, the Empowerment Congress, Community Coalition, Partnership for Growth LA, Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, LA Care Health Plan, United Teachers Los Angeles, Black Progressive Action Coalition, St. John's Community Health, the National Lawyers Guild, the Weingart Foundation, and more. Space is limited, so if I were you, I'd register right now at KBLA1580.com. Your voice matters, your presence matters. We'll see you there.
Donald Trump has all but declared war on California, sending in a National Guard, blocking disaster relief, and cutting funds to our colleges. And now, he and Texas Republicans are trying to rig the next election by stealing congressional seats from black voters in states like Texas.
They want to rig these elections, and they want the power that gerrymandering provides.
Seriously, look it up. But Prop 50 is how we fight back. It gives Californians the power to fight fire with fire and beat Trump at his own game. Prop 50 creates temporary emergency congressional maps that level the playing field and protect the power of black votes. Not just in California, but across the country. Your vote matters, and the whole country is counting on California to lead. So use your vote to protect our power, our history, and our future. Vote yes on Prop 50 by November 4. Ad paid for by Yes on 50, the Election Rigging Response Act, Governor Newsom's Ballot Measure Committee, Ad Committee's top funders, HMP for Prop 50, and Fund for Policy Reform.
You're inside the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
And we are continuing our conversation with Nick Presley, co-director of States at All Voting is Local. So, Nick, we in California, no one was actually preparing for a big election 4 months ago, and suddenly we have one as states across the country prepare to elect governors and many other offices in their states. I'm wondering, before we get back into the larger challenge that we face headed into 26 and 28. I'm wondering what All Voting is Local is, kind of doing in this off-year election, right? We know that there's, a bunch of statewide races happening, but what are you all focused on right now? What's the work that you all are doing?
Well, yeah, there's no off-year elections,
right? Exactly.
In our work. So we work year-round with our partners to prevent partisan interference in our elections. We work to advance fair and inclusive rules on voter registration and remove barriers. In 2025, the story of All Voting Local is all about Americans stepping into our power to protect and defend our right to vote. Last year, we were able to partner with voters and election officials to demand that all citizens, particularly Black, Brown, Native American, and other historically marginalized groups, were able to register to vote cast their ballots freely and fairly, and have that ballot be counted. And so the trust we built on the ground in the communities then and in years past has enabled us to continue to support election officials' efforts to expand voting rights. In Florida, our state director recently published an op-ed in the Orlando Sentinel talking about how administrative DMV changes affect voter registration. And this is about an administrative issue that would affect voters voting by mail. Then in Georgia, we saw a purge, one of the most extensive voter purges in U.S. history, 478,000 voter registrations. Our team worked with a partner to ascertain whether there were any problems with the way the state has conducted the removal, identify affected voters, and then determine long-term solutions for list maintenance issues that may have caused some inadvertent purges that should have happened. We noted in Michigan and Pennsylvania, states to which I work with very closely, that we were able to respond and work with state government to ensure that they have an appropriate response to the DOJ demand for sensitive voter information. And then in Wisconsin, we're tracking kind of some breaking news out of Waukesha County, where a judge ordered the Elections Commission to verify citizenship for registered voters and for clerks not to register new voters unless they can verify citizenship. And so, our work as All Voting is Local is nonpartisan, and we tend to focus on 5 key areas to ensure that the right to vote belongs to all of us. And those areas are voter registration, improving and expanding state and local voter registration practices so that, Americans can, again, get on the rolls and stay on the rolls. And then we work with voting, advancing voting policies and practices that enable every voter to vote when, where, and how it works for them in under 30 minutes. We work to stop partisan interference. We foster a culture of opposition so that when bad actors try to take steps that to remove our free and fair elections, we're not the only ones standing there. We've got a culture, organizations that are with us, election officials that are with us, and overall, we work to strengthen the movement by connecting state, local, and national organizations. Our principle that we're founded on is the idea that we combine national expertise with voters working hard on the ground, and that is the recipe for effective change.
Yeah, it does. We were talking in the last hour about the media, the news, ecosystem right now, and for independent newsrooms, black newsrooms, like how they are managing and how they manage in this moment where it feels like every day there's this tsunami, right? Every hour sometimes, right? Every other hour there's like this tsunami of news that comes down that they have to sort of manage and make decisions about how they get out to people who are trying to make sense of the world right now. But as I'm listening to you talk, I'm also realizing that there's just this tsunami of attacks, right, on the right to vote. And sometimes we hear about the ones that, that maybe bubble up to become a national story. I know you said that the Wisconsin issue is breaking. But I wonder how you all and your partners, like how folks are, for the voters on the ground in these states that both you all and your partners are engaging, how much are people aware, right? Because that this much is being tampered with, right? In terms of their right to the vote and their access to the ballot box. Are voters aware, right, that these things are happening? And is it demoralizing when suddenly, for folks in Wisconsin, when suddenly it's like, what do you mean I have to show proof of citizenship?
It may start out as demoralizing, but I think once folks become aware and realize that there is a lot of support out there from organizations like mine and our partners, that they become empowered. There are a ton of attacks happening on a near daily basis. There are some weeks at work where it's like, oh my goodness, on Monday it's like, wow, this has been a long week already. But the fact of the matter is that we're not in this alone. As I've mentioned, we've got a number of great partners. We've got a number of election officials that work with us as well, or that are willing to listen and work towards the same ideals as we are. And we see that in Pennsylvania last year, which is where I reside. There were provisional ballots that were going to be tossed out in 2024 at the end of the election, and there were voters being challenged left and right for reasons that they shouldn't be challenged. We're talking overseas voters, that were overseas working with the military, or overseas we're UOCAVA voters, we call them, overseas working with the military, or working or going to school, or who were legally allowed to vote while overseas, who were being challenged, and we saw the American people rise up. We saw these voters show up to 9 a.m. Eastern time hearings at these local voter elections offices, either via Zoom. Some people came home in order to attend these places in person, and we were able to beat back and get a number, like a large majority of these provisional ballots counted. The vast majority of them ended up being counted in these races in 2024. And so, the American people have shown time and time again that when you threaten our right to autonomy and our right to free and fair elections, that we are prepared to stand up and defend that once we know it's happening. And I'm heartened by the fact that I'm on here talking to you all the way across the country in California about these issues, because more and more people are starting to pay attention is what that means to me.
Yeah, and it definitely, I think, again, like I wanted to talk about this issue because I do feel like it's gone under the radar, that people don't know that the federal government is trying to get access to this data. And you talked about, which I think is really important for folks that may have just joined us, the kinds of information that they are trying to gain access to, right? So things like Social Security number, things like vote history, not just whether you vote or not, that's public, right? But, who you voted for, like information that one can identify very specifically the individual person, and that can, give a government right now who operates in highly partisan ways, right? Access to what people thought was protected information, right? And I want to, because you mentioned that you all are nonpartisan, and that makes sense because you're actually fighting for things that should not be partisan, right? The people's ability to register to vote or have their vote counted, right? It shouldn't be a partisan issue, but unfortunately, in this environment, it is. And the way that the DOJ actually is going after states and going after this data is extremely partisan, right, in the approach. So I just wonder, just your thoughts on, how this kind of extreme, partisan actions, right, how this undermines our system of elections and voting rights, right? You talked about a little bit earlier about how it can, demobilize people, right? But I wonder just your thoughts on like this what feels like a very partisan approach to the way that this is being carried out and what that means for just our system of elections in general.
Well, yeah, to be clear though, I'm not sure if there are any locations that will tell you who you voted for with this information, but I'll tell you, if you take my Social Security number and you get my birth certificate, you get my birthday, you get my driver's license number, there's a whole host of information you can find out about me. And if I was a marketing executive or someone in an administration with bad intentions, I could use that information then to highlight, specifically target, and decide who to exclude from voter rolls, who to make it more difficult to vote for, what precincts and locations should have longer lines, because they're underfunded. I could use that information to do a host of bad actions. And again, they told us that's what they want to do with this. Yeah. They told us that in Project 2025 information, and they told us that with President Trump's executive order on voting. And, it may seem demoralizing on the surface, but I want to emphasize that we are winning in many areas, in many ways. Good, and it very much is bipartisan. I'm proud to say that our team in Wisconsin was able to host a press conference with bipartisan press conference with legislators from both sides of the aisle to advance a series of election-related bills in Wisconsin in a rare instance of bipartisanship that will make voting better for the citizens of Wisconsin. And so You know, we see that on a number of levels across the country, and so don't lose heart, Americans. You know, we've not lost our free and fair elections yet, and we will not.
Well, I appreciate that. I had to have our last guest pull me out of the darkness as well, and, and I appreciate you doing it as well. Both the good catch on the not being aware of any place where they're actually can see who you voted for, but just on also reminding people that we are winning a lot, quite frankly, and certainly in the courts, and so that's actually a helpful reminder, I think, as we try and resist against all of these things. When we come forward, we're going to wrap up our conversation with Nick Presley, co-director of States at All Voting is Local. Stay with us.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
September is World Alzheimer's Month, a time to shine a light on a public health crisis that deeply impacts Black families. 1 in 5 Black adults ages 70 and older is living with Alzheimer's disease, or AD, and the risk is twice as high compared to white adults. But AD isn't just forgetting a name or losing track of time. Signs of early AD could be repeating questions, missing appointments, or struggling with bills and daily tasks. These things aren't a normal part of aging. Here's the good news. Treatments are available that may help if AD is diagnosed early. If you notice changes in memory or daily routines, whether in yourself or a loved one, don't wait. Early diagnosis and intervention are key to managing AD effectively. To learn more about AD and a potential treatment option, visit treatalsearly.com. That's treatalzearly.com to learn more about the signs and symptoms and a potential treatment option. This message is brought to you by AZI. JP Morgan Chase offers tips for the local business owners in 2025. Small business landscape is ever-changing, and the Los Angeles market is no exception. A startup or legacy business, revisiting your mission statement and recalibrating offerings can renew opportunities for growth and innovations. Programs like Chase for Business Coaching for Impact gives entrepreneurs access to expert guidance, helping you streamline operations, strategize your growth, and navigate complex challenges. Businesses with a clear sense of purpose can navigate any challenge effectively, but also build stronger customer loyalty. Visit chase.com/coaching for impact for more information. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase.
KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. The Los Angeles Regional Food Bank is on a mission to fight hunger and provide nutritious food to those in need across our community. They partner with federal, state, and local programs advocating for better policies and funding for critical hunger relief programs like Cal Fresh, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. The food bank works with coalitions and local representatives to make sure hunger is addressed in every district of LA County. They also run nutrition education campaigns, raise hunger awareness, and source nutritious food for distribution, all while supporting regulations that allow food pantries to operate safely. Want to help? Visit lafoodbank.org or call 323-234-3030 to volunteer or find a food bank near you. Together, we can ensure that no one goes hungry in Los Angeles County. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
Thank you all for staying with us. We are wrapping up our conversation with Nick Presley, co-director of States at All Voting is Local. And so as we, head into, this upcoming election in November, which I still find it hard to believe that we are in October. So the idea that we are about to start voting is, still just surreal. But I want to ask you, and you've said some of this, I'm going to ask you to repeat just so that listeners can, get a sense of what they should be paying attention to. What are some of the issues that voters need to be aware of, right, as we look toward the upcoming election cycles that they should be paying attention to, whether just for their own knowledge to make sure that, they're not getting caught up in any way, but also for things that we talked about earlier that they might need to be advocating with their local election officials around?
Well, we know that Americans want elections to be free, fair, safe, and accessible. We had a study where we found that 83% of Americans believe that voting should be safe and accessible because it's a fundamental right and responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so voters should be paying attention to these top threats: attacks on voter eligibility and registration, attacks on voters, such as by rollbacks to vote by mail, attacks on election systems and administrations through voting machines, and efforts with the Election Administration Committee. And we should be paying attention to what election deniers in positions of power are doing. With regards to the specific efforts by the DOJ, we need to recognize that no administration should be able to weaponize the government to fuel distrust, especially in historically excluded communities, to undermine state authority, that the states run the elections, the president does not, the administration does not have the legal authority to control elections or change the voting process constitutionally granted by the states, and that we need our election officials to resist unlawful federal interference in our voter rolls. The first actionable solution, is to work with them to ensure that Americans can get on the rolls and stay on the rolls.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you all, so as we're looking, again, we're headed into an election. The sort of midterm cycle is, I feel like, every election we say this is the most important election, and literally everyone has been, right? And next year's midterm election is no different. I'm wondering if you all are headed into the midterm election cycle thinking that you'll just be seeing more of the same that we've seen in past years in terms of efforts to, block access and muck up the systems and process, or if you're thinking that there's going to be an escalation, right? Is there going to be some kind of an escalation? And if there is, what do you all are anticipating that might be?
Well, it's that permission structure that I mentioned earlier on. That permission structure has been created. The signals to state election officials of what they will be allowed to get away with has been sounded, and so we will see more of the same. There may be some escalation based on the fact that these permission structures have been installed and are now in place, and we're prepared to counter those with whatever means are at our disposal, and the American people are prepared to as well.
Well, let me ask you this. So I want to go back to this question of the thing that you're raising about permission structure, and just make sure that we're being clear for folks what you're saying. I mean, essentially, I think, and you tell me that what you're saying is that the permission structure that is being offered, right, or is being set up, right, is essentially for local election officials who are going to be bad actors to do bad things. Right, to do, and maybe some of it is more of the same, right? Like purging people off the voter rolls and, making it harder for people to get to the poll, reducing the ways in which people are able to vote. But it's essentially saying to those folks, go crazy, right? Whatever you want to do. Is that make sure I'm clear about what you're saying.
That's exactly right. And these folks need to remember that they are beholden to the will of the people. Some of them are elected, some of them are not, but they are beholden to the will of the American people. And again, we know that 83% of the public wants free, fair elections, wants, greater access to the vote as opposed to less access to the vote. And there are ways to hold these folks accountable as well.
And to talk about what those are, because I think that's also...
It depends on where you are, at this point in time.
Sure.
Right now, in fact, in Wisconsin, there is a mayor in Diney, I think it's. My Wisconsin team.
That's okay. Not getting that right. They won't hear it. They won't hear it.
But right now, he's facing ethics complaints because he took a drop box and essentially stole a drop box and said that voters should not be allowed to use it illegally. And so he's being held to task right now in what we expect to see a ruling on very soon. And so, this is happening on a local and state level, and there are still processes in place that can counter what I've been calling a permission structure thus far.
Well, I think that, that's important. And this is I think as much detail, right, as we can help to provide to folks, both so that they know kind of what is coming, what they're facing, but most importantly, what they have the ability, to do about it, right? I think, part of the playbook that seems to be playing out here is to convince people that there is nothing that they can do. Right, that these things are just happening, that the federal government has the authority to do these things. I'm really glad that you raised, because I think it often goes past people that states actually run elections and that the federal government doesn't, and that the states have, purview and overview, right, of what happens in terms of election administration within their borders. And so, I think it's just important that people have as much information. I think you talked about, or you said earlier about this information and being connected, right? Like knowing that there are organizations like yours and the partners that you all work with on the ground, that by itself empowers people. Right. And I think that's critical. But I feel like this is an important conversation because the amount of information I think that you're putting out there for folks is really critical. And I'm assuming that is the case, because you mentioned the sort of empowering people, that when you all are doing this work, that you all see that happen. Is that true, that you just people it is noticeable, right? That people feel like things don't just have to happen to them, right?
Yeah. We don't just have to sit back and take it. And I see this every day. I see voters becoming empowered to be involved in ways in which they haven't before. I've seen election officials become empowered to be involved in ways in which they haven't been before. There is a persistent counter that's in process against these attacks on our voting systems. And we need to pay attention and we need to do the work. But there are folks out there doing the work. And so when a voter finally, gets the idea that this is something to be paid attention to, they're not stepping into a realm where there are no solutions or where there's no one who's already laid the groundwork for how we can secure victories in this fight. There is a robust, history now, several years of wins when it comes to this type of efforts.
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, really important to mention that all is not lost. There's plenty of work to do and lots of people out there doing it. So Nick Presley, co-director of States at All Voting is Local. I want to thank you for joining, for bringing all this really important information on an issue that I think isn't getting talked about a lot, and for, pulling me out of the darkness to remind me that we are winning, and that there's still lots of opportunity to win. So appreciate all the work that you all are doing, and appreciate you for joining us. I also want to remind. Sure. I also want to thank everyone for joining, and remind folks that, again, if you got your ballot at home, that you should be getting that filled out and getting it turned in to a drop box or wherever it is that you turn your ballot into as quickly as possible. Election Day is around the corner. November 4th is the last day to vote, which means that you have lots of days to vote between now and then. But thank you all for joining me here on the Black Pack. We'll be back next Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Enjoy your weekend.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Amber Payton with BIN News Now. Virginia's governor candidates faced off at HBCU Norfolk State University in their only debate before the election. Democrat Abigail Spanberger clashed with Black Republican Winsome Earl Sears, who repeatedly interrupted and was warned by moderators. Spanberger backed abortion rights and bipartisan cooperation, while Earl Sears called her an extremist. Black Maryland Governor Wes Moore has replaced most members of Baltimore